They say the night the Velvet Dynasty was doomed, no bells rang, no alarms sounded, and no one screamed. Instead, something far stranger happened. Every portrait inside the royal palace began to cry. Thin, slow tears slipped down painted faces, darkening the canvas like old blood soaked into cloth. Guards walked past without noticing. Servants wiped the floors and said nothing. But history noticed, because this was the moment the lie finally became too heavy to carry. Welcome back, seekers of hidden truths, to another chapter torn from the edges of forgotten history. This is not a story of heroes or villains, but of beauty taken too far, of silence mistaken for peace, and of a single image that held an empire together until it broke. Tonight we open the sealed pages of a dynasty that wrapped itself in velvet and called it eternity. The Velvet Dynasty ruled not through fear, but through appearance. Their world was soft where others were hard. Their halls were quiet where others echoed with steel. Power to them was not shown through war, but through elegance. And yet, beneath the silk curtains and candlelight, something rotten had been carefully hidden away. The people sensed it, though they could not name it. The air inside the capital always felt heavy, as if the walls were holding their breath. That winter, the rain tasted wrong. It left stains on stone and smelled faintly of iron. Old scholars would later say this was the world itself reacting, warning those who still listened. But warnings mean nothing to those who believe they have already defeated time. And so the dynasty slept peacefully beneath painted eyes that were no longer blind, unaware that their most precious creation had already begun to remember everything they had tried to forget. To understand how the Velvet Dynasty fell, you must first understand how it lived. Their empire was not forged in fire, but in fabric, perfume, and carefully chosen illusions. The ruling family believed that reality was something to be shaped, softened, and covered, much like a floor hidden beneath layers of fine cloth. Their capital was famous across the continent for its beauty. Visitors spoke of endless galleries, mirrored halls, and walls so thick with tapestries that sound itself seemed to vanish inside them. Velvet was everywhere. It covered thrones, stairways, even the doors of council chambers. The dynasty believed harsh edges invited rebellion, but softness encouraged obedience. When people feel comfortable, they stop asking dangerous questions. This philosophy guided everything they built. Their streets were clean, their ceremonies flawless, and their public celebrations carefully choreographed. Suffering existed, but it was pushed out of sight, locked behind palace walls, erased from records entirely. Art was the heart of their power. Paintings were treated as sacred objects, not merely decorations. Every ruler commissioned dozens of portraits, each one carefully crafted to present strength, wisdom, and calm. Flaws were never painted, wrinkles were softened, fear was erased. These images were meant to outlive flesh and bone, to tell future generations a perfect story that never truly existed. Over time, the dynasty began to trust images more than people. Decisions were made to protect appearances rather than lives. If a village suffered, it was not helped, but removed from the maps. If a voice spoke too loudly, it was silenced gently, without blood, without noise. The empire did not scream, it smiled. And slowly, quietly, the Velvet Dynasty forgot the difference between peace and silence. At the centre of the Velvet Dynasty stood its ruler, a monarch admired for grace, refinement, and calm. To the public, they appeared unshakable, a figure carved from patience and control. But behind closed doors, the truth was far more fragile. This ruler did not fear enemies, assassins, or rebellion. Their deepest fear was far quieter and far more dangerous. They feared being forgotten. Every morning began the same way. Before addressing the court, the ruler would walk alone through the portrait halls, studying the painted faces of ancestors long turned to dust. They searched those eyes for reassurance, for proof that memory could defeat death. Each portrait whispered the same promise. As long as the image remains, so does the soul. And the ruler believed it. They surrounded themselves with artists, poets, and historians, not to seek truth, but to shape it. Events were rewritten before the ink dried. Failures became necessary sacrifices. Cruelty became difficult wisdom. The ruler convinced themselves that beauty justified everything. If the empire looked peaceful, then it was peaceful. If the palace glowed, then the people must be warm. Yet at night, doubt crept in. The ruler dreamed of empty halls, of walls stripped bare, of no one left to remember their name. These dreams left a cold ache that no velvet or candlelight could soothe. It was not power they wanted, but permanence. This fear slowly changed them. Compassion became selective. Confession became weakness. Truth became a threat. And when whispers reached the throne about a portrait that could capture not just a face, but a legacy, the ruler did not hesitate. They did not ask what it would cost. They only asked how soon it could be finished. That single question sealed the fate of the Velvet Dynasty. The artist arrived without announcement, without escort, and without history. No one could recall who summoned them, only that they appeared at the palace gates one grey morning and asked, calmly, to see the ruler. Their clothes were plain, their hands unmarked, yet their eyes carried a strange focus, as if they were not looking at faces, but through them. The guards felt uneasy letting the artist pass, but no order was given to stop them. Somehow, they were already expected. When the ruler met the artist, few words were exchanged. The artist did not boast of skill or reputation. They did not ask for gold. They simply said they could paint a portrait that would never fade, one that would outlive stone, time, and even memory itself. The ruler felt something tighten in their chest, a mix of hope and fear, but they agreed immediately. From the first brushstroke, the portrait felt different. The artist worked in near silence, often painting late into the night by candlelight, refused assistance. They mixed their pigments alone, using colours no one could name. Servants noticed that the air around the canvas felt colder, heavier, as if the room itself was listening. When asked about their methods, the artist only smiled and continued painting. The ruler sat for the portrait day after day. Each session left them exhausted, as if something more than their image was being taken. The artist studied every expression, every hesitation, every unspoken thought. When the final stroke was placed, the portrait looked perfect, too perfect. The eyes reflected not just confidence but knowledge. The smile held something unfinished. The ruler felt relief, pride, a strange sense of safety. They did not notice that the artist was already gone, leaving behind only a painting that seemed far more awake than it should have been. As the autumn winds carried a chill through the marble corridors of Oakhaven, the Duchess fell into a strange and sudden languor. Her skin, once radiant, began to pale, and her laughter faded into silence. The finest physicians from across the continent arrived with their leeches, charts, and powders, yet none could uncover the cause of her wasting sickness. Their knowledge, ancient and precise, faltered before the mystery that gripped her fragile body, leaving them shaking their heads in quiet despair. Duke Valyrias, who had long feared the slow decay of life, found himself pacing endlessly along the polished floors of his palace, his mind a storm of desperation. Each corridor, once echoing with the music of courtly life, now seemed hollow, carrying only the whisper of his own fearful thoughts. He watched helplessly as his beloved Duchess, the living embodiment of art he had worshipped with almost religious devotion, faded before him, her presence dimming like a candle struggling against the wind. The city outside reflected this sorrow. Once bustling markets now held only shadows of merchants, and the marble walls of Oakhaven, which had gleamed like polished bone under the moonlight, seemed to grey as if the stone itself mourned alongside him. Every moment was a torment, each hour a reminder that beauty and life were fleeting. In his grief, the Duke began to turn away from reason and faith, listening instead to whispered tales of forbidden knowledge, arcane rituals, and old wives' warnings. The fear of losing the Duchess entirely was a key turning in his mind, opening doors to choices no mortal was meant to make. Desperation is a dangerous companion, and for Duke Valyrias, it had begun to whisper temptations too dark to ignore. He wandered deeper into the palace archives, through corridors lined with dusty tomes and forbidden texts, seeking answers the learned men could not provide. The voices of the old wives' tales, once dismissed as superstition, now called to him with an almost seductive insistence. They spoke of bargains struck with forces that dwell in the spaces between breaths, of power that could bend life and death, of preservation beyond natural law. On a night when the moon hid behind thick storm clouds, a stranger appeared at the palace gates. Cloaked in grey wool, he carried no weapons, no satchel, yet moved with the silent confidence of someone who had been expected. Introducing himself simply as Moros, the architect, he claimed to hold the solution the Duke so desperately sought. It was not a cure, he said, for flesh and blood must always decay, but a preservation, and eternal stillness that could capture the Duchess in a perfect moment, frozen against time itself. The proposition was seductive, its logic cold but irresistible. Valyrias, consumed by grief and fear, listened intently, hanging on every word that sounded like the grinding of stones deep underground. The stranger promised glory, beauty, and an escape from decay, but he demanded a price unimaginable: silence. Absolute, unbroken silence, for the engine that would preserve life could not function amidst the noise of mortal existence. In that moment, the Duke understood that his devotion might save her body, but at a cost that could consume everything he held dear. The Duke invited Maurice into his private study, a room where time itself seemed to slow. Ticking clocks lined every wall, their rhythmic sound once comforting, now oppressive in the silence of his despair. The stranger's presence made the air feel heavier, as if the shadows themselves had grown watchful. Maurice spoke of a mechanism, an engine of stasis buried deep beneath the city, capable of freezing the Duchess in a perfect, eternal moment, halting decay and death. It was an idea both brilliant and horrifying, and the Duke's heart trembled at the thought. Yet the price of this miracle was a demand so absolute that it sent a shiver down his spine. Silence. Not mere absence of noise, but the erasure of sound from the city itself. For only in perfect stillness could the engine function. Valyrias looked at the portrait of his dying wife, her eyes shimmering with life fading fast, and then at the dark parchment Moros laid before him, absorbing the candlelight as if it were alive. Temptation was unbearable. To preserve her beauty, to protect the fragile glow of her life, he would give anything, even the impossible. With hands trembling and eyes clouded by grief, the Duke signed the silent treaty. He could not see yet that this act was more than a bargain. It was a condemnation. The Duke believed he was saving life, but in reality, he was inviting a darkness that would stretch its fingers over Oakhaven and over every soul he loved, in ways he could not yet comprehend. The weight of the choice settled over him like a leaden cloak, and for the first time, the palace felt truly cold. As the ink dried on the silent treaty, an unnatural stillness descended upon the palace, thick and suffocating, pressing against every corner of Oakhaven. The Duke felt it first, a weight on his chest, as if the very air had thickened into stone. The clocks, once rhythmic and reliable, stopped one by one, their ticking swallowed by a silence that seemed alive, aware and unyielding. That night, the city itself changed. In the morning, the citizens awoke to discover that their voices had been stolen in sleep. Mouths moved, but no sound emerged. Their cries of alarm vanished into a void. The Duke ran through the marble halls to his beloved Duchess, hoping her presence would remain untouched. Yet even she seemed different. Still beautiful, her cheeks flushed with a ghostly glow, but her eyes reflected an alien calm. She turned toward him, movements smooth, mechanical, and hauntingly precise, and offered only a vacant smile, untouched by emotion. Beneath the cobblestones, the engine of stasis hummed, a low, rhythmic vibration felt rather than heard, spreading through the bones of every man, woman, and child. The preservation had begun, but it was not gentle. Life itself started to fade, replaced by a hollow, apathetic stillness. Craftsmen ceased their work, bakers forgot hunger, laughter and tears vanished, leaving a city that resembled a living museum. Every street, every plaza, became a frozen tableau, and Duke Valyrias realized, with a terror deeper than despair, that in his attempt to protect his wife, he had begun to unravel the very essence of life in Oakhaven. The city was no longer alive. It was preserved, but at a cost beyond imagining. Days turned into weeks, and the true horror of the silent treaty revealed itself in unbearable clarity. The people of Oakhaven did not merely lose their voices, they began to lose their will to act. Desire, passion, and purpose all faded, replaced by a hollow, mechanical existence. Artisans, once brimming with creativity, polished the same silver chalices endlessly, their hands moving without thought or inspiration. Bakers, who had once risen with the sun to knead dough and feed the city, now worked out of routine, neither hungry nor satisfied, performing tasks that had lost all meaning. Streets that had echoed with laughter, arguments and music were now frozen tableaux of motionless figures, faces smooth and unexpressive, bodies rigid yet unnervingly human. The palace itself mirrored the tragedy, its velvet curtains heavy with dust, marble corridors echoing nothing, and the Duchess moving through the halls with the grace of a statue, her luminous skin an eerie mockery of life. Duke Valyrias wandered through this kingdom of ghosts, a sovereign among the living dead, coming to the terrible realization that in halting decay he had also halted the essence of life. Without the unpredictable friction of joy and sorrow, without the beauty of fleeting moments, existence itself had become unbearable. The silence pressed on him like a living weight, a constant reminder that every choice has consequences, and that in his devotion he had doomed not only the woman he loved, but the entire civilization of Oakhaven. Despair settled like frost over his heart, as he understood that no plea, no prayer, could reverse what had been set in motion. The Duke's heart grew heavier with every step through the silent city. Oakhaven had become a kingdom of statues, a living mausoleum, and he was the only one left capable of grief. The Festival of the Moon approached, once a celebration of laughter, music and joy, but now it arrived as a cruel reminder of what had been lost. Citizens gathered in concentric circles in the great square, their faces smooth, eyes vacant, awaiting commands that would never come. Valyrias's mind teetered on the edge of madness, his sorrow sharpened into torment by the unnatural stillness that surrounded him. Desperate for any spark of life, he dragged the Duchess from her ghostly procession, pleading with her to speak, to cry, to curse him, anything to remind him that she had once been flesh and blood. But she remained as perfect and still as marble, her luminous skin untouched by emotion. Each silent gaze cut into his soul, revealing the horrifying truth. The treaty had not just stolen voices, motion. It had stolen the essence of humanity. In those moments of isolation, the Duke discovered that Moros, the architect, was not merely a man but a cosmic force, a principle that sought the cessation of motion and the reduction of existence to pure, eternal form. Every halted heartbeat, every unsaid word, every unexpressed thought fed the engine beneath the city, growing its power. Valyrias understood with gut-wrenching clarity that to undo this stasis, he would need to commit an act so utterly human and chaotic that it would shatter the perfection Moros had built. Only through a sacrifice of profound, irreducible imperfection could life be restored, or at least freed from this frozen nightmare. Duke Valyrias descended into the subterranean vault beneath the throne room, guided by the low, throbbing resonance of the engine of stasis. The chamber was enormous, filled with intricate brass machinery and frozen clockwork, where steam hissed silently through pipes and gears turned without sound. In the centre lay the core, a pulsing crystal that seemed to inhale light and exhale silence, feeding on the absence of human noise and desire. Every suppressed emotion, every unspoken word, every halted heartbeat had empowered it, and Valyrias understood that the very soul of Oakhaven had become the engine's fuel. He lifted the silver letter opener, the same cold instrument that had failed to wound his preserved Duchess, and realised the enormity of what he must do. To break the treaty, he could not rely on voices or bells, on noise or machinery. He needed to offer a sacrifice that was profoundly human, a final act of chaotic defiance against the perfection Moros had wrought. With courage born from grief and love, Valyrias pressed the blade directly to his chest, over his heart, letting his warm, mortal blood flow into the cold, unfeeling gears. In that instant, the engine shuddered violently, the pulsing crystal shrieked, not a sound for the ears, but a tremor for the soul, an unbearable discord of life and mortality that tore through the carefully constructed silence. The machinery of perfection could not withstand the raw human imperfection of his sacrifice, and the vault shook as the brass gears twisted, snapped, and shattered, releasing decades of frozen time back into the streets above. Valyrias' final act proved that no force, no architect, could fully cage the human spirit. Above the city, the engine of stasis collapsed in an invisible explosion of time and chaos. Oakhaven was no longer frozen. The perfect stillness shattered in a rush of accelerated motion. Citizens, once statues, were caught mid-step, mid-breath, decades of unlife crashing through their bodies in a single heartbeat. Marble walls crumbled into dust, velvet robes of courtiers disintegrated into tatters, and the streets became a chaotic storm of collapsing time. The Duchess, whose preservation had been the Duke's obsession, blinked slowly, her glowing skin dissolving into fine white powder, leaving only her wedding ring to roll silently across the stones. The silent treaty was broken, but the cost was absolute. Oakhaven was transformed into a city of ruin, accelerated decay overtaking every corner, a ghostly monument to the dangers of trying to halt life's natural flow. Duke Valyrias, having sacrificed himself to shatter Moros's perfect design, lay still, his final sight, destruction of his gilded prison and the fleeting freedom of his people. Though life was not restored in its entirety, the human spirit, once imprisoned, was liberated from the unnatural perfection that had drained it of feeling. The city vanished from maps, whispered only in cautionary tales among historians and cartographers. It became a reminder that existence is defined not by preservation, but by the fleeting, imperfect, and chaotic beauty of each passing moment. Love, grief, laughter, and sorrow, all are gifts, even if they fade with time. The weeping portrait that doomed the Velvet Dynasty serves as a haunting testament. Some desires for control over life and death carry consequences far beyond imagination, and the ephemeral nature of life is its most precious truth.